Hi everyone, I'm Lynsey Henry and I'm back for another live event with Stigma-Free Society. Now, just to remind you to take a moment to review our video disclaimer in the description box. And we just want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and staying safe during this tough time. Now, once again, these live events are for you and we want to hear from you, your feelings, your questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And our Stigma-Free Toolkit is available at stigmafreetoolkit.com. And there's lots of wonderful resources there for parents, for youth, for educators, and for school counselors like myself. And we're adding new things. We just had our fundraiser event a couple weeks ago, and we're going to be adding some great new resources, so look forward to that. So once again, I'm Lynsey Henry, and just to introduce myself a bit more, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, and after that, I actually worked in some group homes for teenagers, and I was waiting to get hired as a teacher, so I did that for a couple of years, and once I was hired as the teacher, I taught for about 5 years, substitute taught, and I also worked as a kindergarten and grade 1 teacher. And then I decided I wanted to pursue my master's in counseling. So I finished that in August of 2019. And I've been working as a school counselor for the past 2 years, as well as a registered clinical counselor, taking private clients, children and teens, on the side at Moving Forward Family Services. So today we're going to talk about a bit of a difficult topic. We're going to talk about abuse and different triggers around that. And I thought that was really important for us to discuss today during COVID-19 because we're spending so much more time at home. And this might increase also, we have more time around those potential abusers that may be in our lives. So I actually came across a June 8th article from News 1130, and they stated in BC, child abuse cases are increasing during the pandemic. And so critical injury and death investigations are up 16%, and that was stated by Jennifer Charlesworth. Also, our education minister, Rob Fleming, said last week, with fewer kids in school or at the community centers, there will also be more times for tragedy, and he worries because there's less seen cases of abuse and neglect because we're not seeing kids in the community as often, and not as many kids were attending school either for the teachers to be checking on kids and whatnot. So we're legally required as citizens to report any suspicions of abuse, and you can do that at a 1-800 number, 663-9122, or 604-660-4927 at any time of the day or also this BC Handbook for Action on Child Abuse and Neglect. And in that, teachers are trained to be watching out for different signs of abuse and neglect in the classroom to report them. Another thing I came across with our partners' Kids Help Phone, their phone calls have been increasing a lot as well during this pandemic. And an article I came across that came out on March 17th from CBC News stated that Kids Help Phone President, CEO Catherine Hay, said the number of calls from youth with concerns around COVID-19 and other safety concerns has jumped 350% over those 2 weeks where it just started, the pandemic. So they anticipate a minimum of 2,000 calls or texts each day. So they were really reaching out for more volunteers and supporters during this tough time as well. And I wanted to share with you my personal experiences. Myself, I was actually in an abusive relationship for quite some time. And I think it's really important for women, for youth, all kinds of people to know the different signs of what's going on in an abusive relationship and how you can get help. And even as friends and supporters of somebody that might be in an abusive relationship, it's so important to be aware and empathetic of those difficult things that might be going on in your friend's life. As I mentioned, I worked in group homes, so I was exposed to children that had experienced abuse there, and I had to make several reports while working in the group homes with police around abuse. I also worked in my practicum at an art therapy group where women were fleeing domestic violence relationships and were actually living in housing. And so I worked with the children there in an art therapy group for them to express their feelings around what was going on and just processing and enjoying some art as well. And even as a registered clinical counselor in my practicum, I had to make several reports around abuse. So I think it's really important for us to be looking out for those signs in our youth and around our friends and in our communities. So there's several different types of abuse. So physical obviously involves physical violence or hitting and whatnot. Emotional abuse is those really damaging words and that manipulation that goes along with emotional abuse. Sexual abuse as well. There's sometimes online abuse going on in chat rooms with teenagers and whatnot. So that's important to recognize as well. For adults, financial abuse, their partner using finances to their advantage can be a form of abuse as well. Even stalking behaviors can be considered a form of abuse too. So abuse can be in relationships. Also, it's in talking about child abuse and neglect. And I thought it was really important to point out to you about gaslighting. So this is something I hadn't really heard about until I was maybe in my late 20s. Like I mentioned, I was in an abusive relationship. And if I knew a lot of these signs, I feel like it would have really helped me. So the signs of gaslighting, basically it means when someone intentionally is twisting your perception of reality for their own gain. So manipulation tactics, basically. Some signs of that, maybe you are becoming more of an anxious person. Maybe you feel like everything you're doing right now is wrong and you're apologizing a lot. I remember I used to apologize a lot. A lot of my friends would pick up on that. Why are you apologizing for things, Lynsey? It's not your fault, right? And thinking everything you do is wrong, questioning your own responses to your partner. So they're always blaming the problems or the arguments on you, right? Feeling more isolated, can't hang out with your friends as often. Making excuses for your partner or leaving out certain information to your friends and families is also a form of gaslighting. And you just feel kind of hopeless, overall kind of hopeless, and you don't know where to go for support. Now, some different things that I came across on social media in regards to abuse. A really important one I came across is this hand signal in video chats, and that was by the Canadian Women's Foundation, and they started this campaign called the Signal for Help. And so it looks like this. They even set out a TikTok video of it that I posted on my Instagram. So you hold up your hand like this with your thumb tucked in, and then you hold your hand over top and cover your thumb. And that's a signal that people can use on video calls with their friends to reach out for support and help. Now, I came across a few other ones as well, but I appreciated this hand signal because it was from directly the Canadian Women Foundation. I've come across a few others on social media. I think it's mostly people posting them, not necessarily organizations, but I will mention them to you. So I did come across one about makeup, and if somebody's selling makeup and asking for liquid eyeliner and then asking for an address, and the address is for shipping. And then they say that's a way to reach out for support as well. I've heard ones about bread as well and bread ingredients and using that kind of as a signal. So those are some different ones that I had come across. Around triggers. So people that have been in abusive relationships or children even that have experienced abuse, there's several triggers that you might become aware of that are important to acknowledge, especially if you're a professional working in the school setting or working with children in the community. So some of those triggers might be even words of emotional abuse that might have been used, right? So that might be something like stupid, idiot, they might be swear words, they might even just be the tone of voice that the speaker is using. So maybe it's a deeper tone of voice or a softer tone of voice can trigger a child that had been in an abusive home. And they're quicker to that fight, flight, or freeze response. So something I saw as a teacher often is that children that I suspected that may be in abusive homes were often those children that would be in the freeze mode. And they would hide under tables or just kind of shut down in certain feelings. So I'm going to talk about some of those feelings as well, because even some of those feelings can be triggers for children. So feeling excluded from different friendships, playing outside, can also trigger that abuse, kind of the fight, flight, freeze response. Feeling powerless, unheard, or scolded in class, punished in class for doing something wrong can bring up that response as well. Feeling judged or blamed or disrespected by their teachers or other people in the community. Feeling ignored, unsafe, or having some unexpected changes in the day can also make a big impact and affect their learning in the classroom. Feeling unfair, things are unfair, controlled, And just overall being aware of these triggers and discussing them with a mental health professional can be really important in the healing process from abuse. So, I also mentioned in my talk on trauma a few weeks ago about the ACE study. So, that's the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. And in that study, they had questions around child abuse as well. So, if the child had been sexually abused or physically abused in the home or witnessed any domestic abuse. So, those ACE scores contributed to further health struggles later in life if they had experienced that abuse, and possibly even developing post-traumatic stress disorder later on in life. So I wanted to share some resources with you now. The Families Change website. So I mentioned this in my talk on separation and divorce. They have a specific section on areas that teens can go to for support, or what teens can do in their teen section when they are in a home with abuse going on. So I thought that that was really helpful. So if you visit the familieschange.ca website and click on the teen section, there will be a section specifically for abuse and different tips for teens around that. The Options Community Resource Society has several different programs that they put on for parents and their children that have been in homes of abuse. One of them is the PEACE program. Another is the Child Sexual Abuse program. And you can find their programs at options.bc.ca. Another great community resource is Diversity, and they have a program called Stopping the Violence, and their website is dcrs.ca, and it is mainly for immigrant or refugee women that are leaving abusive situations, and they also do it in multiple languages. So it's a good one to know about if you're a school counselor or an educator and have a suspicion that a family might be going through that difficult situation. Another one is the YWCA, Violence Prevention Resources, and that's for women leaving abusive situations. So I'll list that one below in the comments after my talk as well. A big one for educators and teachers and parents is the Kids in the Know free resources. There's some free stuff they can send you. I love free stuff. So I'm going to show you a few of those things, and their website is kidsintheknow.ca. So some of their things that you can use in the classroom as a teacher, they go through the 7 root strategies, okay? And they even have like a set that comes with puppets and all kinds of stuff. A lot of school districts and the school counselor will store the resources in their room, but I'll go through the 7 steps with you briefly. So a big one is shouting no and running away and telling someone if somebody asks you to do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Keep and speak secrets. So teaching children what kind of secrets can we keep, like a surprise birthday party, for example. And what type of secrets should we speak about when somebody is being dangerous or making us feel uncomfortable in those abusive situations. They also talk about the buddy system and making sure that if our youth and children are going out, that they're with a buddy in the community. Trusting your instincts. So instincts, it explains what that means to the child and paying attention to the feelings in their body. Dignity and respect. All people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. So it goes through explaining that in different lessons for teachers. And another, so when your parents don't know, you must shout no. So that's a big one as well. And if asked to share and your parents aren't aware, say no. So that's if somebody is offering, a stranger adult is offering treats or gifts or something that's making you feel uncomfortable. Support. So that's one of the free posters I got. I got several free ones, but some of them are at my office at school. So here's another one, My First Safety Book for ages 4 to 7. There's also free safety workbooks for older ages as well that you can order even as a parent to go through with your child. I find it's helpful to go through those things and those safety tips. Billy and His Buddies, so that's all about the buddy system once again. This one I found really helpful, child sexual abuse, and it is your business. So it goes through different things we can do as community people and citizens to report abuse. In particular, I liked this section, how to support children during a disclosure. So if you get a disclosure from a child, it goes through these different steps. I'll do them briefly with you. So it just says to listen empathetically, control your reaction and body language if a child's telling you about an abusive situation. Do not correct their language if they're saying some kind of genitals or sexual acts that are not framed properly. It's not time to educate them, it's time to listen. Take what they say seriously. Praise the child for telling and being brave, and they did the right thing by disclosing. Protect the child and other children from overexposure. So just make sure you're in a private area and that not other children are listening. Show warmth and caring. Avoid making promises. So a lot of the time kids in a moment of disclosure will say, please don't tell my parents, or please don't tell so-and-so, I'm worried that they're going to hurt me. So just making sure that you don't make a promise not to tell anybody, because you are responsible to notify people to make sure that the child is safe. Okay? And reporting the disclosure. So I gave those numbers in the beginning of my talk there for reporting abuse. These little pamphlets are helpful for parents about child sexual abuse and picking up the pieces after a bad situation like that happens. And just understanding child sexual abuse, advice for parents and caregivers. So those were some of the free resources that I got from Kids in the Know. You can also find the BC Handbook for Abuse and Neglect online if you search it. So I'm going to pause here for some questions. And afterwards, I want to do a pencil paper activity with you quickly around a healing flame that I would do in session with youth and children that may have experienced abuse that I find helpful. All right, so I'm just going to scroll here for some questions. Have you faced difficult situations when reporting abuse? Yes. So at the beginning of my teaching career, and I was new and fresh, I hadn't had to report much abuse situations before, but I worked in an inner city school in Surrey, so like a lower income kind of area. And when I would report the abuse, sometimes I'd be quite upset after I found myself. So it was nice to have my teacher colleagues around me to talk that through with afterwards, just my feelings of being upset around reporting. Also, I've had difficult situations to report where I've had to do a report with the police. So I've had that in the group home where they came in the middle of the night when I did 24-hour shifts, and the police officer came and took my statement in the middle of the night, probably 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. And it was making me feel quite anxious myself, and having to do that statement and recall the facts of what I had heard. And so after that situation, I got together with some of my colleagues from the group home and just kind of discussed my feelings around that. And they gave me some tips of how they dealt with those feelings as well. During my practicum, I also had a difficult situation where I had to go into a police office and do a report around a sexual abuse case. So that was really tough on me as well. By that time, I'd had more experience, and I knew to reach out to other counselors to debrief and support. And so I did so. I reached out to another child counselor, and she gave me some tips before I went into the office to front load me of what to expect. And then afterwards, she also offered her support to me in debriefing that scenario. So thank you for asking that question. I think the biggest takeaway there is to make sure if there is a situation where you need to report and you're feeling uncomfortable at it afterwards, to make sure you reach out to your colleagues to debrief. Debrief is really important. Okay. How do you help a friend who's in an abusive or toxic relationship, but they do not see the relationship in that way? So I think this is how maybe some of my friends were feeling when I was in an abusive relationship. So they would point out and support me, and they would point out some of those things like, Lynsey, you're saying sorry a lot, and is everything okay? Or just check-ins with me as often as they could. Is everything okay? How are things going? Do you feel safe? Do you need any support? Different services to me. I was in counseling at the time because I was a new teacher, and they urged me to speak to my counselor about that as well, because I was facing a lot of stress with being a new teacher as well. So just offering them services and doing it very gently and being that empathetic listener to come to. I would say that's the best solution. And unfortunately, if that person's not ready to make a change and leave their relationship, all you can do is be there for them to listen and support. And when they are ready, to help them with that step. So for me, one of my closest friends allowed me to live with her rent-free for a few months to escape that relationship. So I paid it forward and did the same thing for one of my friends that was having a difficult relationship as well. And I paid it forward and was a supportive friend and let her live with me for 3 months while she sorted that out and was able to leave the relationship. So thank you for that question. How has COVID-19 affected abuse? Well, as I mentioned above, in that article by News 1130, they did say that child abuse has increased. And it's harder to report because people are more often in their homes, less often in the community or in schools to report, which are generally the people that most often report are those school professionals or the people in the community. So I would say just as being a neighbor, or like if you live in a townhouse complex, an apartment complex, and whatnot, and you're sitting outside in your patio and you're kind of, just doing your own thing, minding your own business. If you notice anything out of the norm, don't be afraid to listen a bit, right? Because that's the people that you live near and your safety and their safety. And if it was me, I would want somebody to look out for my safety too, and I would understand if they had to make that report, right? So have your ears open, have your eyes open, I would say, around COVID-19 and abuse. Do you find that emotional abuse is harder to prove because there's no physical evidence? How is this dealt with? Yes, I do believe it's might be harder to deal with in some regards, especially in relationships. As I mentioned, my relationship was more emotionally abusive. And I think there's lots of stigma around that, unfortunately. There'll be people that say, oh, well, why weren't you stronger? Or you just have battered women syndrome. So I think just by providing awareness and not being afraid to talk about this issue, that brings kind of destigmatizes it and makes people realize, hey, it's not okay for my partner to be so controlling. It's not okay for them to talk to me that way. And just as women, or even as friends, can be males too, just not being afraid to have those deeper and harder conversations with your friends and ask them those harder questions about their relationships, because you're their friend and you're there to support them, whether it's emotional abuse or physical abuse. And just as a friend, opening your ears if you're at their house and different things are going on. Don't be afraid to tell them, hey, I heard your partner arguing with you about not doing chores, or hey, I heard your partner calling you names while you were cooking dinner. How did that make you feel? That's not okay. And just letting them know, hey, that's not okay and that's not your fault. So don't be afraid to speak up, I would say, and talk through these things. How do you help a friend detect red flags if they're in a pattern of multiple toxic relationships in a row? That's a tough one. Something that I've done and my friends have done is we all are kind of interested in psychology and different things around just different terms like gaslighting and whatnot. So sending them articles. So kind of dropping them little hints like, hey, maybe you should have a look at this article. I'm worried about you. And so that they can see some of those signs and symptoms of gaslighting and some of those signs and symptoms. And one thing I use with my friends a lot that I heard from another counselor is, what is the common denominator here? So in speaking about their relationships, I noticed that you're in a lot of controlling relationships sometimes. Who's the common denominator here? Who is choosing or being part of those relationships? I think it's you, and just getting them to come to that conclusion and realizing maybe it's time for them to work on themselves and take a break from relationships or seek help for their self-esteem, because that's another big effect of abusive relationships is it impacts our self-esteem. So just making sure that you're suggesting that to your friend to get counseling support and pointing out the commonalities in their relationships, that it's not okay. Yeah. All right. Last question here. How do you process the trauma of abuse after it happens? Well, I can speak from a personal level. I feel like it just takes time. Honestly, it takes time, and it takes talking through it with your friends, people that you trust. It takes counseling, lots of counseling, talking it through with a counselor, finding your strengths and finding your positivity, finding those affirmations and those words that matter to you. And that really can help build that self-esteem up again and help make you stronger in that healing process. But it does take a lot of time and a lot of self-growth and self-awareness and journaling. Finding those positives, I think, are huge. And also, I'm going to tie that into my activity that I'm going to be doing with you. So I'm going to be doing a healing flame with you. And I actually found this healing flame on Pinterest from Alexandra House blog, and they are in the States. And they put together this healing flame to go through different steps, factors to help youth heal from abuse. And I liked some of their steps here. So I kind of modified it for you today to make it a bit of a quicker activity and also to make it stand for an acronym. So the acronym I created was FLAMES, using their different tips and incorporating some of my own tips of how to heal from abuse. So obviously each individual's path of healing is going to be unique. So some of these steps might come in different orders for different people, but overall, all these steps together can help that healing process. And as a counselor with your clients, you can be getting them to draw the flame and writing in the different steps by going and then talking out loud with them and explaining each of those steps and what they mean. Like in the end, so you get an idea how big of a flame to draw, okay? So here it is, quite big, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different layers in the flame. And I'm going to post this image to my counselor Instagram after at the passionate underscore counselor if you want to see the Alexandra House one versus my version and some other cool resources. Okay, so let's get started. So first step, we're going to do a nice big teardrop kind of flame that takes up most of our paper. Okay, so I'm going to sketch mine out with you here too. Nice and big. Excuse me, I'm a little sniffly today. Allergies. Okay. And I'm going to do my second row. So here's my first 2 rings of my flame, if you're following along. All right, so now I'm going to do my next row of my flame for 3. Now I need my 4th layer of my flame, 5th layer of my flame, and final 6th layer of my flame. So it should look something like this. I know I'm doing it on live, so it's not the best sketch of a flame, but that's okay. All right, and at the top you can write healing flame. And our first step in healing from abuse is going to be finding support. So on your outer ring, I want you to write finding support, because that's a huge part of healing from abuse, is finding someone to support you, whether that be talking to a close friend or family member at first, or seeking help from a counselor. So by speaking to a professional or trusted friend and naming that abuse, what's going on, physical, emotional, what are the different things they're saying, is the first step really towards healing. And it helps begin a journey to break through that isolation of the abuse. So finding support. So I wrote that on my outside. All right, so second step, we're going to write let go and grieve/grieve. Because this is a big process. Like I mentioned, it's going to take time to heal from the abuse. So trying to allow yourself to shed tears, to express your anger about how you felt in that abusive relationship or as a child, and doing that in a healthy way through boxing or exercise, or having a good playlist to go along with your exercise too can help a lot. And just allowing yourself to grieve your emotions around that abuse. And it's going to take time, and these feelings might come in waves, and that's okay too. On my third spot, I'm going to write acceptance. And acceptance and positive thoughts are also another huge part of healing. And we want to rebuild our self-esteem. So recognize what happened was wrong and how it's affected your life. And try to accept it without resentment and move past those raw emotions to focus on the positives and the overall in your life. Build your self-awareness through journaling, identify some positive thoughts and affirmations to help you with your healing. The next 4th step is maintaining boundaries. So with our friends, we want to set certain boundaries around our triggers that we may have from that abusive relationship. Maintain boundaries. So some of those boundaries, you're not responsible for others' behavior, only your own. You have the right to expect respect from others and power to treat others how you want to be treated. So if you want to say to them, for example, I don't like it when you use this certain triggering language that my partner used to use or my parent used to use. They should respect that. So maybe that word might be crazy or stupid or that kind of language that you don't want them to use. Make it clear to them and maintain and set those boundaries. Okay, so now we're on the 5th, and we're going to explore and redefine the concept of love. Because as a child, if there was an abusive situation, you might have seen your parents been overpowering one partner or controlling, and the other partner might have been submissive or dependent. And so that's time for you to reflect and think to yourself what you do and don't want in relationships and redefine, what does love mean to me? All right, so we're on that last step, and it's safety planning. So this is a huge part of being a professional and hearing a disclosure of abuse is safety planning and making sure that you're developing that with a professional and preventing from further future harm. And in that safety plan, list those family, friends, or other close people to you and organizations that you can reach out to for support if for whatever reason the abuse comes back or that you need support. And or if you need somebody to alert of the abuse. So maybe even putting that hand signal in your safety plan for a way to acknowledge that abuse is occurring is a good strategy. Also list some coping strategies here as well to help you really decompress and really deal with your feelings around that abuse. So here it is completed. And I get my clients, my youth, to color it in as well, different colors of flame, as we discuss each of those steps. So that's about all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for listening and take care of yourselves. See you next week. Bye.